All right, let's dive right into this explainer and try something honestly a little wild. We are going to attempt to cover 781 years of shifting borders, epic battles, fragile alliances, and honestly constant backstabbing, all in just a matter of minutes. We're looking at the Reconquista, a generational conflict on the Iberian Peninsula that literally altered the course of global history. To make sense of what is basically the longest sustained conflict in history, we're going to track the momentum across 6 distinct eras. So we have the Umayyad conquest, the Asturias resistance, the rise of Cordoba, the fall of the Caliphate, the decisive Christian advance, and finally, the final victory. Starting with Section 1, the initial Umayyad conquest. So, the year is 711. Europe is kind of still hungover from the fall of Rome a couple centuries prior. And the Iberian Peninsula, modern-day Spain and Portugal, is ruled by the Visigoths. Now, on paper, they're this wealthy, centralized Christian kingdom, but in reality, it's brittle. It's deeply divided and constantly being undermined by petty, personal vendettas among the nobility. Meanwhile, just across the water in North Africa, it's a completely different story. The Umayyad dynasty is this massive global superpower, stretching all the way from the Atlantic to Persia, and they are expanding fast. They were driven by the historical concept of jihad, which in this specific context meant a perceived divine duty to expand their faith and bring non-Muslim lands under submission. The Umayyad governor in North Africa had just mobilized tens of thousands of new Berber recruits. These guys were promised wealth, divine retribution, and they were hungry for a major economic opportunity. Well, they found it right across the street. And this famous quote? It brilliantly sets the stakes. In 711, a Berber general named Tariq ben Ziyad crossed that narrow strait with about 7,000 men, landing on a rocky cliff we now call Gibraltar, which actually originally meant Tariq's Mountain. The story goes that Tariq was so insanely committed to this campaign that he ordered his own ships to be burned the minute they landed. His troops had absolutely zero choice but to push forward. When Tariq's forces finally clashed with the Visigoths, the Christian king Roderick actually had a huge numerical advantage. But look, having a massive army doesn't mean much if the politics aren't on your side. Half of Roderick's nobles hated the guy so much, they actually switched sides right in the middle of the fight. Others just packed up and abandoned the battlefield altogether. The entire command structure shattered, King Roderick was killed, and this 300-year-old Visigothic kingdom just collapsed, literally almost overnight. Moving on to Section 2, the resistance in Asturias. By 720, Umayyad forces had swept north with just incredible speed. They're taking major cities, even crossing the Pyrenees into France. But their advance famously hits a brick wall in 732, halted by the Frankish commander Charles Martel at the Battle of Tours. And that creates this incredibly tense, permanent border between two vastly different worlds. South of that border, this newly conquered territory gets named Al-Andalus, meaning land of the Vandals. And it quickly transforms into a thriving Muslim province. Trade just explodes, new cities are rising right up out of old Roman ruins, and the whole region gets plugged straight into the massive wealth of the wider Islamic world. But while Al-Andalus is thriving, this tiny little spark of resistance is quietly forming up in the misty, rugged mountains of northern Iberia. Now, the sheer irony of this matchup is just incredible. On one side, you've got the global Umayyad superpower, wealthy, centralized, sprawling. And on the other, you have Pelayo. He's this extremely stubborn Visigothic noble who just absolutely refused to surrender. He's hiding out in the mountains of Asturias with maybe a few hundred followers, in what you could barely even call a kingdom. It was really more like a handful of huts, a church, and one very, very optimistic cave. Obviously, the Umayyads didn't take this little pocket of resistance very seriously. I mean, why would they? They sent a small task force up there just to collect taxes from these mountain hermits. But Pelayo's men were waiting. They ambushed them in a narrow mountain pass called Covadonga, literally just raining rocks and arrows down on the Umayyad forces. Pelayo secures the legendary first Christian victory of the Reconquista. Was it a massive battle? No, it was a tiny skirmish, but it proved the empire wasn't invincible, and it became the foundational legend for the Kingdom of Asturias. Which brings us to Section 3, Rise of the Caliphate of Cordoba, because the geopolitical landscape was about to completely shift. Back in the Middle East, the giant Umayyad Empire was actually imploding. In 750, a rival clan called the Abbasids overthrew the Umayyads in this spectacular bloodbath, moved the capital to Baghdad, and effectively abandoned Al-Andalus completely. But, and this is a big but,
One Umayyad prince, Abd ar-Rahman, managed to escape the massacre. He flees all the way across the Mediterranean to Spain, and in 756, he carves out an independent emirate of Córdoba. Fast forward a few generations to 929, and his descendant, Abd ar-Rahman III, takes it a massive step further and actually declares himself caliph. This essentially elevates Córdoba to a level where it's directly rivaling Baghdad itself in global prestige and power.
Under the Caliphate, Córdoba hits an absolute golden age. I mean, their achievements were just staggering. They built these massive libraries that completely dwarfed anything up in Northern Europe. They're bringing in advanced irrigation, new crops. They actually introduced citrus to the region. Plus, they're pioneering groundbreaking algebra and building unmatched architectural marvels. The society was so advanced that Christian scholars from the north would actually travel south just to study Arabic philosophy.
All right, on to Section 4, Fall of the Caliphate. Because, well, golden ages always come with cracks. This incredible prosperity in Córdoba, it relied on a super fragile unity between Arab elites, Berber soldiers, and local converts. And once strong leadership faded, that whole system started to wobble. Finally, in the year 1009, it snapped. A brutal civil war broke out, tearing the caliphate apart right from the inside.
So, almost overnight, this unified powerhouse of Al-Andalus shatters. It breaks into dozens of competing, constantly backstabbing city-states known as taifas. The south was essentially on fire. You had every local prince scrambling to outshine his neighbors, desperately trying to claim the ghost of Córdoba's former glory for himself. And that leads us to a stunning twist of historical irony. Because these taifas were so incredibly busy fighting each other, they ended up doing the most counterproductive thing imaginable. They started paying the northern Christian kingdoms for military protection. Think about that. The Muslim rulers of Spain were quite literally handing over their wealth to fund the exact same Christian armies that were actively praying for their downfall.
This brings us to Section 5, the decisive Christian advance. Sensing blood in the water, those Christian kingdoms, Leon, Castile, Navarre, and Aragon, realized, okay, this is our moment. What started as a few guys in a cave in Asturias had grown into these formidable, heavily armed states. And so began this slow, centuries-long grind southward. It was like a giant chess match full of sieges, raids, and constantly shifting borders. Now the momentum swung wildly back and forth for well over a century. In 1085, Castile captures the old Visigothic capital of Toledo, which was a massive psychological blow. The taifas totally panicked. They ended up inviting these hardline North African dynasties over, first the Almoravids, then the even stricter Almohads, to cross the strait and push the Christians back. And honestly, it worked for a while. The Almohads even handed the Christians a totally crushing defeat at Alarcos in 1195. But the pendulum swings back permanently in 1212. In this super rare moment of unity, a huge coalition of armies from Castile, Aragon, Navarre, and even some French crusaders all march south together. At the Battle of Las Navas de Tolosa, they utterly, completely shattered the Almohad army. This was it. This was the true turning point. After this battle, Muslim dominance in Iberia was broken for good, and Al-Andalus began to totally collapse. Section 6, Victory of the Catholic Monarchs. Through the 1200s, major Muslim cities just fell to the Christian advance like dominoes. Córdoba, Valencia, Seville, gone. By the mid-1200s, almost all of Muslim Spain was totally wiped off the map, except for one single, incredibly stubborn kingdom holding out in the very south. Tucked right beneath the Sierra Nevada mountains, the Kingdom of Granada managed an absolutely incredible feat of survival. The rulers of Granada used highly clever diplomacy, strategic marriages into Christian courts, and of course, heavy tribute payments just to stay alive. They walked this insanely dangerous political tightrope, and somehow they successfully stalled the end of the Reconquista for another 200 years. But, every tightrope eventually snaps. That moment arrived in the late 1400s when Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile got married. This union merged their respective realms into an absolute Spanish superstate. Known as the Catholic monarchs, they finally had the massive resources and the singular focus needed to finish what Pelayo started in that cave 7 centuries earlier. Their ultimate prize? Granada. In 1482, Ferdinand and Isabella launched a grueling 10-year military campaign. Fortress by fortress, they literally closed the noose around Granada. Finally, on January 2nd, 1492, the last Muslim ruler handed over the keys to the city. The Reconquista was officially over. But here's the crazy part. This victory immediately freed up massive Spanish resources. Resources that, later that exact same year, were promptly used to fund a certain Italian sailor named Christopher Columbus. So the absolutely crucial takeaway here is this staggering number, 781. That is 781 years of continuous generational conflict. It's a massive span of time filled with shifting alliances, incredible cultural exchange, technological advancement, and relentless holy war that defined the Iberian Peninsula and essentially forged the modern nation of Spain. Which leaves us with this final, genuinely fascinating question to consider. When Columbus sailed west under the banner of this newly unified Spain, he carried with him the exact same fire of conquest that had just burned across Iberia for 8 centuries. So it really makes you wonder, did the longest war in history actually end in 1492? Or did it just pack up, cross the Atlantic, and shape a whole new world? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and remember to always keep questioning the history you think you know.